So now we're going to take a look at the process for hypothesis testing. For the purpose of hypothesis testing, the way we start a hypothesis test is that we assume that the null hypothesis, or remember we denoted that H0 is true. Then what we do is we find if we run this test assuming that our H0 value was true, what is the probability that we got the results that was shown to us from our data? After the test, H0 is either rejected or we fail to reject, or the data fails to reject. If the original claim H0 can never be supported, only rejected or not rejected. But if our original claim was H1, or the alternative hypothesis, then when it comes to our conclusion, we will either support or fail to support. So our steps in hypothesis testing is to write the null and alternative hypothesis and mark the original claim of the problem. Then, assuming H0 is true, we identify a significance level, and depending on the seriousness of a type 1 error, the mistake of rejecting H0 when it's actually true, if making a type 1 error is a serious problem, we will use 0.01, or basically a 1% margin of error. But for less serious cases, we might see a p-value or an alpha value of 0.05 or 0.10. It says use the calculator to find the p-value. In this case, we'll actually use Excel to find the p-value. We're going to go over how to do this for each type of tests in the next two sections. If the p-value is less than alpha, then we will reject H0. Depending on the conclusion, we will either reject or support the claim. If the p-value is greater than alpha, then we will fail to reject H0. Now, here's a nice flow chart that I feel does a pretty nice job of illustrating this. So, actually, I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. So this chart breaks down kind of into two sections. We will work with the top section if H0 is our claim. So we work up here if H0 is the claim. We work down here if H1 is the claim. So you start by saying, does the claim contain the state condition of inequality? This is when your claim is H0, because remember, with claims of H0, it was something like P is equal or not equal to some proportion or mean. Then you run your test, and if you reject H0, you're going to, based on your p-value, if your p is less than alpha, we will reject. If your p is greater than alpha, we will fail to reject. If we reject our null hypothesis, then we will say there is sufficient evidence to warrant the rejection of the claim that, and then we'll need to write the whole claim out. If your p-value is greater than alpha, we will say there's not sufficient evidence to warrant the rejection of the claim that, and then we'll write our claim out. So with this one, you can see we will either reject or fail to reject our claim. Now, if our claim does not contain a condition of equality, this is something where we said our H0 is maybe half, but we said that more than half of people believe in something. Then we're in two situations again. If p is less than alpha, so these are the same. If p is less than alpha, you will still reject H0, but when it comes time to get to our conclusion, we will say the sample data supports the claim that. Whereas if our p-value is greater than our alpha value, we will say there is not sufficient evidence to support the claim. So if H0 is your claim, you can see we use the words reject or fail to reject or not enough evidence to reject. If H1 is our claim, we will say support or not enough evidence or fail to support. Kind of confusing now, but I encourage you to take a look and pay close attention to the next two examples, because we're going to be looking at this basically the same problem, but given the two situations, is going to really determine what we can say about our conclusion.